Hey guys, this is Robert Breedlove from the What is Money show. And as you've learned by watching this show, Bitcoin is the single most important asset you can own in the 21st century. And one of the most important companies in Bitcoin today is NYDIG. NYDIG's mission is to facilitate financial security for all. They accomplish this by bringing a high level of professionalization and sophistication to the Bitcoin marketplace. As a true game changer in the industry, NYDIG is safely unlocking the power of Bitcoin for forward-thinking individuals and institutions alike. By using NYDIG, you will gain access to an end-to-end institutional-grade platform, providing Bitcoin OTC transactions, Bitcoin collateralized borrowing, secure custody, asset management, derivatives, financing, market research, and more. And all of these services meet the highest regulatory, governance, and audit standards. Led by Robbie Gutman, Yin Zhao, and Ross Stevens, NYDIG has absolutely exploded onto the Bitcoin scene recently and is leading the way for ongoing institutional adoption in this nascent asset class. So please be sure to check out NYDIG as a single source for all your Bitcoin needs. Hey guys, welcome back to the What is Money show. I'm your host, Robert Breedlove, and I'm sitting down today with Mr. Sonny Ray. Sonny has quite an interesting story, which we're going to dive into. We're going to cover some of the struggle with central banking in India, and we're going to talk about the mission of Bitcoin in India and how all these worlds sort of intersect. Sonny, welcome to the What is Money show.
Thank you for having me here, Robert. I'm looking forward to this. I've enjoyed watching you on YouTube and learning from you on the internet.
Oh, thanks, man. I really appreciate that. I'm really thrilled to have you here. I think we're going to get into more of the personal side of how central banking impacts life for people. So maybe we can just kind of throw you in the deep end here and just say, what is your story? Feel free to go any direction you like.
Yeah. So I think maybe as a starting point, instead of maybe just diving right into my story, since the main topic of, our conversation will be India and Bitcoin, I was thinking, maybe I'll just start off by, for the average person listening to this to tell them why I think India and Bitcoin is relevant.
Perfect.
So the narrative that you speak about, and I think many others now which is this, that Bitcoin is essentially digital gold. India is a country that loves gold.
Mm-hmm.
You can say that. And then in the first part of that word, like digital part of it, right? There are arguably more programmers in India than anywhere else in the world. And so when you think about this beautiful marriage, arranged marriage of Bitcoin, of gold and digital money coming together in Bitcoin, I feel that there's this capacity, at least within the country, to really appreciate where maybe Satoshi was going with this. That's probably, I'd say, the biggest thing. The second thing I would say also is, a lot of people refer to remittance as being another area where Bitcoin may play a big part. And again, India is, one of the biggest inward remitters in the world. And so I would say those are maybe two or three of kind of the top reasons, that I've really always been bullish about the importance of building companies in India for that massive market. But yeah, I just wanted to start it off there. So we can definitely get into my story. How far should I take it back though?
I mean, I would personally, if you're comfortable, I'd love to know from the beginning. Mm-hmm. I think you're a very engaging guy, very smart. Clearly, you've had a lot of experience on the front line. So I'd really love to know where you came from. And that should hopefully help us understand where you are today, I think, too.
Cool. Okay. So, I mean, for me, I would say, the story starts with my parents, right? They moved from a place called Calcutta, which is quite possibly one of the poorest places on earth. I think my dad literally grew up in a hut, and so yeah, they moved to Canada before I was born, and they always obviously valued hard work. And growing up, we would visit India every year. And that, I think, was a big part of it kind of shaped my worldview, because here for like 8-10 months of the year, I'd be living in Canada, in this part of the world where things are a lot easier, if you will, just life in general, things we take for granted, like the fact that drains aren't open and, the fact that, animals don't walk around the road all the time and you're not literally having to duck, watch out for the cow coming at you type of deal. Little things that growing up was just like, wait, how is this possible? Like we're on the same planet, but there seems to be a huge disparity. And I think that was definitely something that, kind of helped shape me. East Indian parents. So what else am I going to do? I couldn't handle biology. After the first pig heart dissection in grade 11, I was like, I'm out. And so I thought, okay, well, engineering would be the way. It kind of fell into that. And I studied electrical engineering. After I studied engineering, so I actually moved from Alberta. I grew up in kind of the west part of Alberta where, oil and gas was really the only thing that you were destined to do. My dad spent 40 years in that space. And after my first few summer jobs there, I realized, Robert, that even though, I have a ton of respect for people in that space and I don't buy into the whole oil is bad for the world agenda, but I knew that it wasn't where I wanted to make my mark in the world. And so nearly 20 years ago, I moved to Toronto and really have been kind of on this quest, to I don't know, just be at the edge of innovation and Toronto in my eyes is kind of that in Canada. And so, so once I graduated as an electrical engineer, I, did what everybody would do. I went and got a job, and I remember so clearly that, I was making, not that much money, but after you'd remove the taxes and, you'd remove the rent and the student loan interest payments and this and that, there was literally more month than money. And, and every month, at the end of every month, you'd just be like, wait, how does this thing even work? Like, how are you supposed to make it work? The numbers just don't add up. And you got to go party, you got to do all that stuff as well. And so I was just flabbergasted. And I never had allowances growing up. My parents kind of shielded us from the whole money thing. And my only real memory of money was like when I was a kid, my uncle gave me $1 to go spend at a convenience store. And it literally took me and my brother like an hour to spend it because we were just like, it's kind of like an area that we didn't understand. And so when I grew up, I finally, during my evenings and weekends, in pursuit of trying to understand money, I thought, well, okay, what would you do? You'd become a financial advisor, go out there and get all your licenses, and start helping others, right? That seems like a noble path. And I did just that. I went and got all my licenses and started helping families, and something just, didn't feel right. And at the time I couldn't articulate what that thing was. It just felt like people wearing really nice suits and working in really fancy buildings, using big words, trying to almost intentionally confuse people about things that they barely understood.
Right,
and when you stood there and just asked them simple questions like, like what is money exactly? Like where does it come from? Or, we're financial advisors here. What is inflation? Like, how does that even, like, what? We just like, that's just part of the equation. Like we just tell people that's a given, but why, where does that come from? How does that exist? And so all of these questions gnawed at me for years. And eventually I just kind of gave up on that space and I just left, and I didn't even want anything to do with it. And kind of put I guess you could say my pursuit of trying to understand money on the side, and spent 8 years of my career really in the robotics space. So I worked for a leading robotics company, and I was their head of business development and kind of helped with outfitting all the major robotics labs around the world. So Stanford, Georgia Tech, and I traveled around the world to do that. And really, it was around 2011 or so when I was working for that company. I'd moved out to India to help them expand. I came across the Bitcoin white paper. And I think it was partially thanks to the fact that I'm not the best engineer in the world, but I'd studied engineering. And I had this like deep kind of gnawing question around like, what is money? And it really felt like it was unanswered, and like pieces of paper with dudes' faces on it, like just didn't make sense to me. It was just like, really, but really that's all we got. So I remember when I moved out to India from Toronto, I didn't have any friends there. right? So I literally spent, I don't know, maybe 6 months in hibernation trying to learn everything I could about Bitcoin. And essentially at the end of that period, really kind of saw what was happening in Toronto with the movement here in terms of, Bitcoin meetups and events. And it just seemed like far more vibrant and lively. And I was like, wait, but there's literally nothing happening in India right now. Like nobody even talks about this and that was really kind of the beginning of my journey in terms of the India Bitcoin story. And so around 2011, 2012, I just made a decision. I was like, look, I mean, I like playing sports, but I don't like watching sports. I'm not going to talk to people about cricket and, this and that. So I'm like, I'm going to only make friends with people who are like die hard Bitcoiners. And I was like, how can I do that? It's not going to happen just sitting behind a computer. And Meetup was the answer. And so meetup.com is something that I'm very grateful for. And we kind of leverage that to the max to just get people together in coffee shops at the beginning. And then we, kind of outgrew those fairly quickly and then finally started doing them in, 5-star, 6-star hotels, you can call them. Have you ever been to India?
I have not, no.
You have it. So I mean, India, I can have a lot of criticisms about it, but they definitely know how to do 5-star hotels right. Like, I mean, when you go to a 5-star hotel in India, nothing in the world compares to it. The service, the grandiose kind of feeling that you get when you walk in.
Nice.
And so what we would do is we would say, hey, look, we don't want just like anybody, right? At our meetups, we want like the cream of the crop. So we would literally have our meetups at like the Leela Palace, where people are getting like patted down by security at the front just to walk into a coffee shop. But people would show up with this mentality, like, all right, let's go. And every weekend, I think it was every Saturday, my wife and I, we'd be like, okay, it doesn't matter if people show up, if they don't show up, we'll just, just the two of us, we'll just hang out, right? Like how bad could that be?
Yeah.
And that was it, man. That was it. And then that really, I would say, kind of, got things started for us in India. And it was my first. And, and by then I had already seen the internet thing kind of come and go and see friends kind of capture that, momentum and build businesses. I saw mobile by then come and go. And by then when I'd seen Bitcoin, I was like, there's no way I'm letting this one go. Like I'm going to put everything I have into it, all my time, all my resources, like all my network, everything I can. And I pretty much went all in around then. And, I don't know. Maybe I'll just pause there. I don't know. Any questions? Or
no, that's an amazing start. Thank you for that. I agree when I like the story about the 5-star hotels, because when you go into a certain environment, it really does kind of change the way you feel and look and deal with people. It's kind of interesting. So I think it's a great place to have meetings about the future of money. It's a super nice, luxurious place. So that was a good play. It sounds to me like I'm getting the sense that you were maybe not too unlike myself, kind of a deeply curious, kid and ultimately adult, that maybe had this gnawing question in the back of your mind, like, what is money? I mean, that for me, that's kind of been a similar experience. And I found the central banking rabbit hole before I found Bitcoin. And when I finally put those two pieces together, that's when I decided to go all in. Like this was the answer to something I think that's really wrong with the world. And you mentioned that your parents shielded you from money when you were young. So maybe you could just tell me a little bit about your wrestling with that question over the years, and then maybe how your relationship with money, how it's changed as a result of thinking like that.
Yeah. And by shielded, I mean, in kind of the most like loving way, right? Like they just, anything we wanted, we got. So it definitely wasn't, a story. I mean, my parents was, but our story wasn't one of like great struggle. I had struggles, but definitely not in the realm of not getting what I wanted. But what I meant is, we didn't really have an allowance system, which we didn't really get money, and it wasn't something we had to actually deal with. As a result, and the parents didn't, and, money is just one of those things where people don't talk about it really all that much, right? I mean, and when I later became a financial advisor, I sat down with thousands of families that just blew my mind how everybody is leading a life of like this quiet, like desperation, and nobody is willing to talk to one another about it.
Right.
And it's this weird like thing that we've concocted up, and they don't teach us about it in schools. And ultimately, like when I finally grew up, I was just like, wait, so there's this thing that that people get into divorces over. There's this thing that people get into world wars over. Yet when I go to anybody, my mom, my dad, my grandma, my grandpa, my teachers, anyone, I go to my friends, I go to ask anybody, the financial advisor, anybody, I go, what is money? And I just shut up. You just go, what is money? And you just let them like, do their mental gymnastics. To this day, like, unless they're a Bitcoiner, have I heard someone be like, well, fungibility and divisibility.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
How is it that all of us are like, it's like oxygen. It is the thing that we live on, yet nobody knows what it even is.
Yeah. The most important tool in the world. Nobody knows.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And I mentioned, I kind of alluded, like when I first got onto the treadmill, if you will, my first couple like jobs, when it wasn't just like a co-op job where you had student loans and daddy's Amex card. And it was like, when you're like, oh, you're on your own now, you're going to do your own thing. It was just like complete and utter confusion. It was just like, I had no clue what was going on. And I had asthma, and I still have asthma. And I would say that was the closest feeling to it, in the sense that, when you have oxygen, you're good, right? No problem. But when you don't, like, when you're underwater, right, or when you have trouble breathing, it's all you can think about. And money is kind of like that. And it's like, and I went from this like state of like, oh, feeling like I had abundance, I can have whatever, to like this place where I couldn't even like make the numbers work. And it was almost like the entire thing was like rigged against me. And it felt that way. But again, like, it's so hard if you're not educated, if you don't have anyone that's even taught you or whatever, it's so hard to articulate or even come up with reasonable, but if you know math, and you can at least question fundamental things like, oh, you're saying that this thing, if it goes up 10% per year over year, then it'll become this. But what if it doesn't? Like, what if it doesn't grow by 10%? You know what I mean? Like, like they make all these like basic assumptions that, I don't know, I just found to be really absurd. And so it was really just like a series of stumbling upon trying to answer that question in my adult life that I just felt frustrated. And really, Bitcoin kind of just came out of nowhere. Like I said, almost 7-8 years, I said, I'm going to forget about trying to understand money. And I'm going to try and, understand like what sales is and what business is and what, like, what does innovation mean? And how do you, what does it even mean to build a robot that, can go to Mars or whatever, like, all this stuff. And so I kind of got caught up by that. But again, many years later, when I finally like, kind of when I moved to India, Robert, the crazy thing was, it was a bit shocking because, in Canada and North America, at least, gold isn't really a thing. Like, unless you're like, following whatever Maloney or, someone, Robert, like, you're not going to really care. But when I moved to India in 2011, that was one of the first things that really startled me. Was, I was kind of getting onto the whole Ron Paul bandwagon and really learning about liberty and what freedom really means, et cetera, et cetera. And at that time, in fact, I even met Dr. Ron Paul, luckily. But when I moved to India, it was startling to see that on payday, you've got lineups of people, wrapped around the bank or whatever, turning their cash, their rupees, into gold. And by the way, I don't know if you heard about the demonetization that happened, right? 5 or 6 years ago in India, where one day literally people woke up and the rupees, the cash that was in their hands was deemed to be no longer valid.
This is the 500 rupee bank note?
You got it. You got it. Yep. And so anyway, so these things obviously came into my life way after I discovered Bitcoin, but these were little kind of hints, like I said, like dudes' faces on pieces of paper, and we've just agreed that we'll give you food. I'll give you, like, what I mean, my best ideas. I'll give you everything for it. Just seems super bizarre. And I was all into this, like, kind of this, how do you create a world that isn't based on scarcity? And kind of the fundamental like realization I had was that the only way to do that is to have a scarce money system, right? And as I was saying is that And I've heard a lot of your references as well about, how, Bitcoin is, there's this relationship to time, right? That you've talked about quite a bit. And that's what I mean by there's not enough month, there's more month than money, right?
Yes.
When you're on that treadmill, it just constantly feels like it's getting away from you. Like you can never retire. You can never own that house. You can never catch up because of all these systems, right? Like the taxation, inflation, and just all these like layers and layers of
Right.
BS that we've the fees and this and that you cannot win even if you wanted to.
I think.
And so, yeah.
Sorry, no, it's a great point, and I like that you brought up the thousands of people you sat down to speak with. All seem to be leading these lives of quiet desperation, because it is even who some people perceive to be as rich, they're struggling with these things as well. There's just so many layers of managing, just trying to do anything you can to outperform inflation and shelter yourself from taxation, which is becoming increasingly egregious over time. And I like that analogy to oxygen. I think it's really important because it's something that, first of all, it's invisible pretty much. We don't really the pre-scientific mind didn't understand the importance of oxygen, let's say. They just knew you had to breathe. They don't really think about it that much. But inflation is that. It's the diluting of the oxygen in the room. So we're kind of being forced up altitude, where there's less and less oxygen as they print more money. And that just forces your system to work harder almost. Right? Like you're, as an organism or an organization, you're getting less and less energy from this vital substance. And to your point, where the deauthorization, it's like, okay, this isn't even really money then, because money should be an asset, like the purest asset, preferably, right? You want to have, if you're holding cash, you're trying to hold a risk minimized position. But in the case of the 500 rupee banknote, it basically has this liability associated with it. It just got turned on overnight. It's like you thought you had money, now you have nothing. Like became just a write-off, right? The total realization of a liability. And I wonder if, are people going to wake up to that? And I love the example too. If you just look at the piece of paper, okay, it's a piece of paper with a guy's face on it. How much work and energy was really necessary to create this small token of trade? And it seems intuitive that you wouldn't want to trade that piece of paper, or someone wouldn't want to trade you a ribeye steak for that piece of paper unless there was something going on there. And it's just a very persistent illusion. And I think when you think of it in those terms, like you need a money that costs as much time or energy to produce as it's worth, right? So if it's obtaining a steak that takes a lot of time and energy to produce, the money should be equivalent. And today we're operating on this very persistent and widespread illusion that we can just put some smug guy's face on a sheet of paper and put a gun to your head and say, use this or else. I don't see how that holds up going forward. But they call us the radical ones. So
yeah. Well, but you do bring up an important point, the gun to your head, right? Mm-hmm. Which is ultimately why I believe, I don't know how to say this. I've been to so many countries now. I've seen so many governments. There's just different degrees of how corrupt they are to some extent. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Right.
And why is that? Like, does anyone ever ask that? Like, why is it that they all seem like they're working, to some extent against the people, whether it's the monetary system, whether it's just fill in the blank. And I believe that if someone were to buy into that line of thinking, it's because of what you just said, which is that ultimately their power comes from a morally corrupt foundation, which is by using force. And if you're a believer in the, non-violence principle, right, which is that non-aggression principle, which is that I shouldn't, hurt you if you don't hurt me, then things like the way we've set up, I think our entire system is like I said, doesn't morally make sense. And therefore anything you build upon it is going to be destined to fail. And so And then people say, well, who's going to build the roads, and you went to a public school, how can you say that, this and that, but it's like, you can't see that, because it's like before slavery or whatever, saying like,
Yes.
well, who's going to pick the, cottons in the fields, and
Right.
who's going to do all that? It's like,
Right.
no, we'll have, we little do you know that like the humanity will devise technology that will, be like these massive autonomous robots that like autonomously go through, these farmlands and produce it. My point is like the free market is magnificent, and we just need to get out of its way to some extent. Anyways,
100%.
okay. I digress. But I think the time point, so when I discovered Bitcoin, the fact that for me, the hands of time flipped, meaning I no longer felt like time was getting away from me. I felt like I had more of it to spend with my daughters, to go to the park if I choose, or to, you know what I mean? Or to like do whatever, play a little video game with my friends or my cousins, like to do these little things and I didn't feel like I didn't have to feel guilty about it, because time was working in my favor. Yeah. So Robert, that's, I kind of, gave, I'm sure there's a lot, backstory as well, but, those are kind of my main threads. Like I said, it's about engineering. It's about, business development, money and sales, and really trying to understand the world and trying to understand like what is innovation, and the one thing I learned from having dealt with almost 8 years of professors and robots and quadrotors and UGVs, is that innovation is nothing more than getting to the edge of a certain field or space, and then looking at those building blocks and just figuring out different ways to put them together and creating something that wasn't done before, right? And Bitcoin arguably is that, right? There's only really about 4 or 5 different super interesting, but innovations that have been around for a long time that Satoshi put together. And I think, but having kind of spent a lot of time in the trenches, I feel like back then I was like, oh, wait, like this is beyond, innovative. Like this is literally, solving the problem of our time. Like I kind of truly believe that all the other problems, the environmentals and the health and the money printing and the energy and the poverty and the it gets solved. You fix the money and that gets solved. That's my
fix
belief.
the world. Yeah.
Fix the money, fix the world. And, and then in the inflate. And one other quick thing is that I also think that it's important to know why you're doing what you're doing. And one of my main reasons is I want to see Bitcoin succeed. And if, let's say 30 years from now, nothing else works, but just we've been able to stamp out inflation to some extent, stamp out. Okay. Let them do what they want to do, but we should have a barometer. We should have a measuring stick that we can, opt out if we so choose. And
absolutely,
if we can at least present humanity with that option, I think we're off to a good start. Now, in the process, we would love for privacy to be a bigger deal and for this and for that, right? But it's just hard to optimize around every single variable. But yeah, Robert, that's a little bit about, kind of coming into like my story in India. Obviously things heat up now in terms of what happens, and we end up, but we can kind of get into that, I guess, whenever you're ready.
Yeah. So it's interesting too that India is such a gold culture. I don't know if you could maybe speak to a little bit of that, where if there's some historical inertia there that's caused that to be the case. I'm only marginally aware that, India was on one of the last countries on a silver standard. I think India and China for a long time. And that, in Safeteen's book, The Bitcoin Standard, he talks about how Britain and other countries being on a gold standard, actually using a harder money, allowed them to usurp a lot of wealth from China and India during that transition period, just because they were holding a money that was better at holding value over time. So it was kind of outcompeting silver at this time and creating a flow of wealth from India and China to these colonial empires. So if there's this deep, and I'll let you speak to that, like why gold is such a deep-rooted cultural value in India. And then it seems, at least the perception we have in the United States is that India is very tech forward. You guys seem to be really kind of the cutting edge of the digital age. So like you said, it's a match made in heaven. Why is Bitcoin not just the thing in India?
I think I'll try and take that last question first, right? Because I think the first one is I don't know if I truly know the answer to that. To be frank, I probably should. I have more of like an anecdotal answer I can give, but on the second one about why isn't it? Do you have many Indian friends or a couple Indian friends? Maybe there's this notorious thing called Indian Standard Time, where if you invite like your Indian buddy to a party, they'll show up late. It's in standard time, okay, and it's kind of like a thing that a lot of people know about. The internet didn't get started in India. It arrived perhaps maybe 10 years late, but once the party got started, there's no stopping it. And so I don't know what the exact reason is, but I think it's perhaps a bit of this like cultural thing where we like to watch a bit about opportunities and just observe from afar. And once the opportunity is clear and present, pounce type of deal. And I don't know. But there's also, yeah. So, I mean, India's definitely come a long ways. Like when we're talking about my story in 2011, 2012, there was like 20, 30 people at a meetup. Today there's arguably, our company alone serves 2 million users. I would guess 10, 20 million users across the country. And so, but that's still a fraction of what's, possible, obviously, in India as well, right? But so I would say it's a bit of that. The regulatory scene obviously has not helped. And, I'll go into more into that detail about kind of at least our stories that have taken place and, what's happened over the years. That hasn't helped at all as well. So I think, and then, India does have capital controls, and there are fairly strict, rules and regulations. And so, given all these things, India's also, I think, a growing economy in many ways, and they haven't really figured everything out. And so to some extent, they look to, United States and other countries as well, right? In terms of what, and arguably the United States is, the bit license wasn't a big hit. And arguably even on a national scale, they're just kind of figuring it out now in a big way, right? So anyway, so I think there's a lot of combination of things. But with the other point around, why is there such this big affinity towards gold? Yeah, like I was going to say, is all I can say is that I grew up in an Indian family, and whether it's my mom or my aunts or my uncles, or mostly the ladies in the family, they absolutely adore gold. And gold is, I think, just, some people say, oh, people love it because it's beautiful. But I think it's like the opposite way. It's beautiful because, people love it. And people have kind of almost instinctually over the years have associated gold as a form of transferring wealth over your generation, right?
So is there a story? Sorry to interrupt, but is there a particular cultural story, or is it just you grow up seeing your parents and aunts and uncles just buying gold? Do they tell you why? Have
you ever seen the Hindu gods? Like they're literally draped in gold. Yes. Yeah. Right? Like things as gold it's like it goes back a very, very long time, right? And I don't know how long when the Sanskrit and and like all that stuff, but I mean, like, India's obviously got a very, very long history. I should admit, off the top is that I'm kind of like a white guy in a brown guy's body, because I grew up in a place called Fort McMurray, Alberta, where I think I had like one other brown dude in my school. And so I'm kind of like this guy that's more like you, that's had all these amazing experiences in India trying to report on it. So gotcha. I feel kind of like a con job just to some extent, and I don't have all the answers, but I don't know. I just know that it's deeply woven into whether it's beauty, whether it's wedding, like when you're marrying, off your daughter or whatever it is, in these arranged marriages, it's all a function of like gold, and you know what I mean, right? Like you see the movies, and it's like I said, the gods, the temples. I mean, and the amount of gold that they're finding, just randomly under some of these Indian temples is it's insane to think of how that even impacts supply and all that. It's a different conversation, but India is definitely, there's this massive love. Now, in terms of some cultural particular story, I don't know. I do know, like I said, in all of the religious things and things growing up, listening to my grandparents tell us things, like gold is literally a part of everything.
Yeah. I like to joke religiously.
Yeah, go ahead.
Gold is a tool that's so old as money. Most people have forgotten why it was valuable, which gets you to those properties of money, right? So that's why I was just curious if clearly there's a huge affinity for gold. I didn't know if there was some supporting myth or story or what have you, but yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah,
I've talked to really high net worth investors here and guys that are running private books of business, putting investors into gold, and they don't know why gold is money. They're like, it's portfolio crisis insurance. It's the one asset you never want to perform well because that means everything else is doing bad. But they don't understand there's this disconnect, which I guess you could possibly attribute to the propaganda of central banks over the past 100 years that gold is kind of a relic. Whereas in truth, as I argue in a lot of my writing, is that it is still the primary geopolitical monetary layer. If one country invades another, they're going to want to be paid tribute in gold. They don't want fiat or drawing rights. They want equity-based money, which is gold. So, really I'm just fascinated by that. Like, what is it? How do people actually, I'm just trying to get in the mind of someone that,
I'm like, so for example, my co-founder Satvik, his father-in-law owns a gold store. And so, in our first event at the Global Bitcoin Conference, where we launched Unocoin in 2013, we actually sold, gold for Bitcoin to some of the attendees. And it was super popular. I think fundamentally gold is I think, I could be wrong, but India's a place that's been around forever, whereas Canada is like fairly new, right? If you think about it.
Yeah.
And so is the United States, but India's been a place that's been around forever. And if you've lived generation upon generation upon generation, right, you've literally see the rupee get like devalued because it's not like the US dollar either. It literally loses value. I think people, just put two and two together. And maybe I don't think they can even articulate that they're trying, but I think people literally just view it like every Indian person has a safe at home with gold in it. Like it's crazy. It's
and embodied like said, knowledge or something.
Yeah. It's like just inherently known. Like that's how, when you go around, you see people wearing gold type of thing. Like, whereas in Canada, if someone wore gold, it's like, oh dude, that guy's weird. But in India, it's like, nah, like,
and the Canada Central Bank has no gold, right?
No, exactly.
Zero gold reserves. Yeah. Interesting.
So I think they've perhaps been able to, maybe brainwash us on this side of the world a little bit easier, right? Because it's like, well, this is where the whole, fiat taking it off the gold standard thing came about. So maybe, it was a bit easier to do here. I don't know.
It's kind of you don't lose trust in paper money until it fails, sort of thing, and it's mostly worked. In the U.S., we've never really had a hyperinflation. The closest thing we had was the Civil War. But the dollar has more or less worked over time. So we don't have that, I guess, historical experience to be skeptical and to make us a proponent of gold, people that don't understand it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm just kind of jumping back to, Bitcoin, though. I do think geopolitically speaking, India is incredibly important because, again, India is a, democratic country for whatever it's worth. It is, it does embrace freedom. For example, as I'm going to go into the story to tell, the justice system did prevail in the end. I mean, it was noisy and messy and ugly, but there is that, and the people do have a voice. And so I think if India loses the battle for Bitcoin, it could have a cascading, a devastating cascading effect on the rest of the world where, you know what I mean? Where they just they just set a precedent for how to ban Bitcoin properly. And so this is why we're fighting tooth and nail, in India, and just trying to make things work, but it's not easy because it's like, what is it? Chewing glass and staring into the abyss.
So this is a great time, I think, to go into that. If you're ready here, what's going on? I mean, all we hear on this side of the world is, India is trying to ban Bitcoin again. And of course, all the skeptics seize onto that. And they're like, see, I told you the governments are going to ban it. All the Bitcoiners seize on it and say, it's not enforceable. It's not going to happen. And it just seems to be kind of polarizing, but I'm sure the truth is much more murky and in the middle. You've seen it up close and personal. Maybe you could just walk us through that experience.
Yeah, sure. So I think this story really begins on, like I said, December 2013. So just a little bit of backstory. So prior to, while I was working at this robotics company, we are preparing for this big conference in December 2013 where we were going to launch UnoCoin, whatever, the first like Coinbase of India, if you will. And I ended up getting hired by a company called Buttercoin, which was out of Silicon Valley. They were backed by Google Ventures, all these like Y Combinator. It was like this dream job, if you will. And I got out of robotics, and that was my segue into Bitcoin, if you will, full time. I was their head of business development, and I worked there for almost a year. But anyway, so this event, this global, and this event is kind of, I guess, important on a lot of fronts. But at this event, we did so these weekly things we were doing were getting bigger and bigger and bigger. We're finally like, okay, this isn't gonna, this isn't a coffee shop thing anymore. Like we've got to, there's a lot of questions, there's reporters, there's all this stuff happening. Let's do a proper event, like 800 people, 900 people, tickets, speakers, like a normal event. And so we organized this thing, and it wasn't me, but I think some of the other people organizing it thought, well, okay, why not also invite, regulators? Because they're going to need to be part of this potentially. They're already asking questions. So we got nothing to hide. This is open source. And we believe it's the future of money. And so I remember my first experience. So the conference starts up, suit, tie, we're all like, running around, and someone taps me on the shoulder and says, Sunny, somebody from the RBI, the Reserve Bank of India, is here. They want to speak with you. So that was literally our first, you could say, face-to-face meeting. And I go over, it's an older gentleman, and he says,
RBI is the central bank?
Central bank. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. The Reserve Bank of the RBI is the central bank. And, long and the short of it, he just says, look, if anyone even so as to mentions that I'm here on stage, I will simply stand up and leave. Understood? We say, yes, sir. Of course, enjoy, the samosas. And that was pretty much the end of that, and a week after that conference, the RBI essentially issued a notice on their website saying that Bitcoins and cryptocurrencies are risky, namely the volatility and security are their two major concerns, and they just put out a buyer beware essentially. And that was pretty heavy, if you ask me, mainly because, it's like we were just like a brand new startup. There was maybe one other business in India, or two other businesses at the time that were doing similar things. And it literally put a cloud over the entire industry. And momentarily we all, kind of just closed our door to try to figure out what this meant. There is one story that I want to share. So as I mentioned, I was with Buttercoin. And so I remember, right after a conference, I was in Colombia because my wife's from Colombia. I was literally sitting by the side of a pool. I see what's going on Twitter. I'm like, oh my God, like what's going on in India right now? We've got 30 people from the tax department at our front door. We only have 4 employees at the time. We've got, some competitors were getting raided by the Enforcement Directorate, which is the anti-money laundering, kind of outfit of the Indian government. And it was just a really, really scary time, because you got to keep in mind, up until then, this was all just like fun and games and kind of just like side project type of stuff, right? Like and then really all we were doing is we were just building different businesses, mining rigs, physical Bitcoins, conference. We were just doing different things to see what would stick, like what would the market actually want. And so it was a bit alarming. And so I remember I called Satvik, who's the CEO of UnoCoin, who I remember I said, Satvik, let's just hang up our gloves here. Like, there's no need for us to be taking on these powerful entities, right? Like we can be doing something else. Like there's a million other opportunities. And Satvik says, Sunny, you're Canadian, you're working for some Google company, you'll go start your own business somewhere else. You'll be fine. But he's like, if I, give up on Bitcoin today, my country loses out on this opportunity. And he's like, we haven't done anything wrong. Like we just started like a week or two ago. So why would we shut shop? And that I think is kind of important because, I was telling you earlier is that I truly believe that the story of at least India and Bitcoin, I'm sure elsewhere as well, is about not just about smart people coming together, but also smart people acting courageously in the face of seemingly, unsurmountable odds. And Satvik is kind of the the epiphany of that in my mind. Balls of steel would be the appropriate term.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. And then another, I would say around the same time that's equally, prolific is, so by the way, I just interviewed Surreal for the second part. So Surreal was this gentleman that I met at our conference, and Surreal was front row. And at the end of the conference, I was living in Bombay at the time, and he was as well. And so we kind of connected, and on our flight and drive back to Bombay, and so this is like, think about it. With December, we just launched our business. The raid and all that other stuff hasn't even happened yet. We're just like finishing up the conference, and I meet this gentleman named Surreal, who happens to be, and I just randomly find this out because we're just sitting beside each other on the plane, who happens to be the son of the most prolific lawyer, techno-legal kind of firm in the country, bar none. Like nobody holds a stick to Nishit Desai and Associates. I didn't know this at the time, but I meet Surreal, and he tells me essentially who his father is. And the next day, Satvik and all of us are in Nishit Desai's office, essentially having him school us on what Bitcoin is and how amazing it is, but also how it doesn't break any laws in India. And what happened?
The partner in the firm schooling you guys about Bitcoin's legality.
So partner, he's the guy who runs. Nishit Desai is the gentleman, and he's the father of Surreal, who, and like whether it's like Google or PayPal, I think use them. Whether it's like the way foreign investments happen into India, like that was them uncovering that years ago. Whether it's payment processing. Whether it's, they're just literally like you could go on and on and on and on of like things that they've done. And he's just this, he's reaching kind of the end of his career, but the gentleman has just like literally moved mountains over the course of his career. And so it was really exciting because it was exciting in the sense that, so a week later, what happens is we get this notice from the RBI and everybody's like, okay, what are we going to do? And Nishit, this lawyer, says, okay, we have two options. We can either put together this long 1,000-page document, submit it to the government, wait 3 years, 5 years, and the entire industry, kind of hangs in limbo, and India, by all, intents and purposes, loses out on the Bitcoin opportunity. He says, or we have option B. He's like, we call a press conference. And so he does. He calls a press conference in his office, and again, I'm just kind of getting to the TLDR of it. He says, "Look, as per, and by the way, this is a firm that has like literally hundreds of people that are engineers first and then lawyers. Like these are wow. Like highly capable. Many of them are very, very capable, and they understand technology like to the nth degree. And they go, okay, as per our techno-legal analysis, we believe that Bitcoins are not illegal per se." And even in the choice of words was really, really key, because no law firm can say that something is legal or Bitcoin is, legal tender. That would never make sense. Yeah. But what they can say is that, as per our analysis, we don't believe that it is illegal. And then even the per se has some weight to it. So my point is this gentleman, like arguably at the end of his career, who's built a lifetime of like amazing accomplishments, decides, and this isn't today when like Elon Musk and like, everybody and their dog is like, oh, Bitcoin's amazing. This is like 8 years ago when Nishit says, no, well, you know what? We're gonna put all our reputation, we're gonna put everything on the line because we believe this to be true. And so, Robert, we're gonna keep going with this interview, but to me, those are I think, this is kind of the early part of the story, but those are two, I think, of the people that I'm just kind of like the face, right? Like telling these stories, but those are two people that if weren't around, then, I don't think Bitcoin would have a chance right now in India. I mean, there's a lot of back and forth, but anyway, so that gets us started with the story. It's his first notice, and then a week after this per se comment, all the companies come back online.
2013,
and this is in December
right?
2014 now, January, February 2014. We're back online. CoinDesk is writing about us. Barry Silbert reaches out, offers to make an investment. Satvik thinks it's spam because who on earth gives you, money for a business, a Bitcoin business? He deletes his email. Barry's like, I'm an investor in Coinbase, investor in BitPay. Like, let's do this here. And so, and then Barry, upon him investing, I was still kind of toying around at Buttercoin, and I was just like, wait, hold on, like the Batman of Bitcoin just invested in the company that that I bought off of GoDaddy. Like this has got to change. So Satvik, lovingly brought me back as one of the co-founders and president, and so my relationship with Unocoin has been constant, but also a bit off and on, in the sense that whether it be like my time with Buttercoin, whether it be later on in the story, my time with Kraken as the head of business development, working with Jesse and his team, and Paycase in Canada and all that. But Unocoin has been really like the main thread, if you will.
That's very cool. Yeah, I love this combination of, sounds like intelligence and courage by these individuals you've laid out on the front line, and how instrumental they've been in Bitcoin's success in at least India or the region. And I wonder if it sounds like the father, at least the head of the law firm, he was taking this up almost on a principle, right? That he was defending Bitcoin from a principled standpoint versus just a purely pragmatic standpoint. Am I getting that sense correct? Where he actually believed in the cause and the mission as much as the technology.
Yeah, it seemed, and credit obviously to Surreal, his son as well, who's also a lawyer, and was kind of the one who planted the seed of Bitcoin in his dad's ear and really played that part. I think there's a beautiful story there as well, right? Where, you know what I mean? Like you have this like new generation of young people that that with every year that goes by, their kind of level of impact on the world and on their parents, and like I just watched the arc of my kind of conversation with my dad over the last 8 years, and how it's evolved. I really do believe that I think it's a principle thing. I mean, he's just like, when I talk about Nishit, I get like like heebie-jeebies. It's he's just one of those people that he's doing it because it's the right thing to do. I can assure you that the monetary kind of benefit, at least at the time and probably up until even today, hasn't even come close to paying in terms of what he's done. And I've literally like been in meetings and all these meetings with him, and just how much he's done. So principled, and courageous, and willing to kind of, face the music, and I've learned also that the media, it gets one of those like things where it can work with you, it can work against you. I mean, it's really this like beast of its own. But anyways, but I think just to be able to take all of that and all of that, credibility, and like put it behind Bitcoin, and it functionally enable us to relaunch and serve, and then get investment from, in my eyes, one of the best investors in the world, was really, I think at the time, considered a big win for us. And we were really the only company that had any sort of like, investor like Barry come on board for years, for maybe 4 or 5 years.
That's that resonates a lot too with what I've seen with many investors in Bitcoin, is that behind closed doors, I think most people are very philosophically aligned with it. Once they get, it's just like, okay, a free market's better than a monopoly, right? It's more aligned with human ingenuity and supporting of human flourishing. There's people that really buy into that mission a lot. There's less people that speak out about it publicly. I mean, I think we're getting more and more as Bitcoin kind of keeps. I joke that Bitcoin's on a hiring spree. You see people like Ray Dalio coming out in support of Bitcoin, Paris Hilton, people all over the spectrum. But it's interesting to me that I think that's a very under discussed aspect of Bitcoin is that it does pull in people's principles and moral fiber. It's like, this is better. This is a better system for people. And even if they don't support it from that standpoint explicitly or publicly, I think in their own character, they sort of buy into it more deeply. And that seems to me, it's almost like an antidote to I would say inflation's doing the opposite, right? It's encouraging people to be a little decivilized, whereas Bitcoin's kind of pushing back on that.
The funny thing about Bitcoin is that I have never in my life ever had an experience where I'm sitting with somebody one-on-one and I'm not able to explain to them why Bitcoin's amazing. It's only when you put Bitcoin up against institutions and the 3-letter and 4-letter words and organizations and the government. It's only then does it start, you get a little funky, right? But when you sit down with a human being and you just explain to them, like, look, this is how money kind of works. Like, there's this new thing. You know what email? Remember email versus the post office? Yeah. Like, are you seriously going to go back to the post office because it was physical? Like, no, you're not. It was just better tech, and the same thing's happening with money. I think more and more people are definitely waking up to it. So, but sorry, what was the kind of the question though around? Is like, I want to make sure I get that.
I don't know if there was a real question. I'm acknowledging this aspect of Bitcoin because it plays into one of my other theses that, again, most people get hung up in the rabbit hole. They're like, oh, the government will never allow it, right? This is the very simple Bitcoin critic standpoint. They're just like, okay, yes, I'll give you that Bitcoin's better money and it does all these things, but the government will just simply never allow it. But there's almost a flaw in that mental model or that way of thinking, in that we're looking at the government as this indivisible aggregate that's separate from us, when in fact, individuals comprise the government. So I see Bitcoin as more of like this vortex of incentives where each individual is incentivized to support it. And by virtue of more and more individuals supporting it, it sort of erodes the coherence of centralized power structures over time. That's what I think. And the analogy I've used is like dissolving nation state power structures, for instance, or central bank power structures in a digital acid. Like, it's actually influencing each one of those policymakers or decision makers to adopt Bitcoin, if nothing else, as an insurance policy against its success. And then once they adopt or hold some, it changes their behavior towards it. So, yeah.
I was going to comment on one thing. So one of my favorite people on earth is this guy named Raghuram Rajan, who was the former central bank, the governor of the central bank in India. He's no longer, but he was. And this guy is insane. He was like some top, I think he was the chief of the IMF at one point. He wrote books about essentially the 2007-08 crisis before it happened, stood in front of people like Ben Bernanke and essentially predicted the financial crisis to a T. Wow. and was essentially laughed at, but his predictions came. The guy's an electrical engineer from IIT, which is arguably harder to get into than MIT. I mean, he is truly, truly smart. And he was imagine an electrical engineer as the governor of the central bank. So I was so like touched by that. Unfortunately, he's not there anymore. But I wanted to bring him up because there's interviews of him on YouTube where people ask him, like, sir, what are your thoughts about free banking and things like Bitcoin? What do you think of that? And I'm just TLDRing his kind of argument. But, he does kind of go on to say that, look, in a world where something like Bitcoin is widely adopted, central banks will struggle because we live off of something called seigniorage, which is the ability to print money, right? And so he says that, instead of us becoming, a source of funds to the government, perhaps it'll be the other way around, like, ha. But it was just interesting that these people are not like asleep at the wheel. They understand exactly what's going down. So I think, and Bitcoin to me represents really just the source of truth. That's all it is. It's just something that allows me to sleep at night, like knowing that I can, count on the thermodynamics of it, the mathematics of it, the computer science of it. There's just something. And if I get screwed, I get screwed, but at least I know what I'm walking into. Right. With the other kind of monetary policies and everything, it's almost like inevitable that I'll get screwed.
Right. Yeah. One's exposed to these endless politics, right? That, again, with the deauthorization of the 500 rupee note is one example of. Whereas Bitcoin, that there's virtually no political unilateral attack vectors, or so it seems. I think the Bitcoin Cash work sort of proved that out, but that's really important. And I think that if you could just have that one key understanding, if we could help people see that this is money that can't be politicized, basically, or politically manipulated or attacked, that's the value prop in a nutshell. It's like it's a money that, like gold, right? Gold was beyond our control. That's why it became money. It had a really inflexible supply no one could change. Well, we've done that again, but we've done it in digital space, and we now have a money with an even more inflexible supply. The value proposition of that uncontrollability, if that's even a word, that's what Bitcoin is.
Yes, absolutely. And and this is why I think this story of what's happening in India and what's happened is so important, because it's literally like oil and water coming together, and these are things that's literally been happening. And so just to kind of, I don't want to bore everyone, but that notice that I mentioned, which essentially just was a warning, essentially resurfaced on the RBI's website maybe 3 times throughout the course of, let's say, 5 years. Okay. And it just, every time things would heat up in the news or they felt like they needed to react, they would put that on their website. But that there wasn't a lot, except for, obviously growth, right? So WiM027 was growing at kind of a insane speed, by 2017, when the big, the last hype cycle was here, we were onboarding, I think, 10, maybe 15,000 users a day, just trying to keep up with, the influx of users. And what happened around that time was, people, all these like scams started popping up, right? Remember, I don't know if you remember, there's one called Gain Bitcoin in India, where it was like a multi-level marketing thing. They were stealing money from people or something. There was OneCoin, Ruja. There was just all and then you had the shit coinery, the whole ERC20 kind of casino thing started. And the regulators, to some extent, policymakers initially, right? Like politicians rather, started throwing up a stink on Twitter, on YouTube, and started talking about, all these things are the same, right? Bitcoin and all these, in their eyes, they're not going to sit there and try and figure out the white paper and this and that. So they're just like, all of it's, bad. And ultimately, it eventually in 2018, it all kind of culminated to this point where the central bank finally issued a notice on their website saying, we don't want any of our banks or payment processors that are within our network to touch Bitcoin. So it wasn't, a banning of Bitcoin. It was specifically speaking, the central bank saying that we don't want banks to service crypto companies.
And so was that legally enforced, or was that just like a guideline? How was that?
It's a good question. I mean, the way it kind of played out is they put out a notice on their website. They gave us, I think it was 2 months. They were very easily able to enforce it, right? And by the way, they didn't need to come to some legal decision. The banks all of a sudden just got scared enough to pull banking for companies like ours. And you can imagine a company like Coinbase without banking. I mean, that's your oxygen. That's how you make money. That's kind of our mission, is to bridge this gap between, fiat or rupees and Bitcoin. So when you're not able to do that at scale, it affects you. And so it was devastating. It was really devastating. We're going to get to the end of the story, but eventually, it was the notice was deemed unconstitutional by all 3 judges, and it was squashed. But the day after our victory, which was about a year ago to this day, we had banking. Our banker was in Sutphick's house on a Saturday, getting us all ready and signed up again. And we do not have beef with the banks. We had, beef maybe isn't the best word to use in the Indian context, but you know what I'm saying is that our main challenge was with the central bank. So that it was interesting, and the court case in itself is another kind of whole story, but in general they shut it down, and the consequence on us was devastating. We had to lay off nearly 100 employees. We kind of just brought our company down to the bare minimum of about 20 that we could keep our service up and running. do more of a crypto to crypto play while we figured things out in court. And for almost 2 years, the company went sideways. And it was, you know, it was brutal, and lots happened. Oh man, lots happened even in between then.
So you're in 2014 or 15?
So now we're around 2017.
Okay.
So we've done, I think, our second round of investments, and we're growing the company at a pretty intense pace. Right. And then along with growth, obviously comes, you know, a lot of attention and scams, and like I said, ICOs, and people just cannot discern what is real from what is not. And as a backlash, the central bank implements or puts out this notice that says that crypto companies, Bitcoin companies, cannot interface with the banking system, and effectively
forces you to lay off 100 people, get bare bones.
Yeah, revenues. Yeah, obviously. Yeah.
Get opportunistic, I guess, with crypto to crypto plays while you figure everything out, as you said. And so then you're a bare bones company. You're in the thick of it. You're going toe to toe with the central bank. What happens next?
Right. And so what happens next is, I guess, both famous and infamous in some ways. And again, just to, you know, not trying to put blame or take credit, but this wasn't really my idea, but one of our team members, let's say, we came up with a fairly well-architected plan where we go, okay, if you think about it, Bitcoin doesn't really need banks from first principles, right? I mean, it's a completely parallel system. So us not having banking shouldn't stop us from being able to serve our millions of users. We have people that want to buy Bitcoin. We have others who want to sell. Most of them do KYC with us, so we know who they are. What if we just, you know, essentially rolled out Bitcoin kiosks? You know, is I guess the would be the more technical term. I think at the time we maybe mistakenly referred to it as a Bitcoin ATM, but really what the machines were they were the exact same machines that the banks buy as ATMs. And our plan was to acquire a couple hundred of these and deploy them across India. We never even got nearly that far. We didn't even get to launching one. We literally put one inside of a tiny mall. And a lot of people might already know this story, but you know, it's just share it one more time. But it's so we put out a machine in a mall, and we're like 2 weeks away from deploying this thing. And that's kind of a critical point because, you know, what's to follow, meaning any criticisms that were held against us couldn't have even happened because the machine wasn't even operational. But because of, you know, the parallel court case going on and all the confusion in the media, and like you said, people from the outside, if you think it's confusing from there, imagine the people within the country as well. Yeah. And so one day, you know, our guys were just getting the machine ready, and somebody random on the internet saw it and saw like the Bitcoin and how Unocoin was going to launch this ATM machine, and essentially tweeted something, and it went like insanely viral, like to the point where I've never seen anything go that viral in my life.
You know what the tweet was?
What the tweet was, I could probably whip it up, but I know exactly what it looked like and everything because it was our machine, and it went viral. And then the media picked it up, and literally, I think like 30 or 40 like reporters swarmed this tiny mall owner's office, and essentially, you know, we're trying to figure out what was going on. And long story short, due to a lot of the confusion, the police in Bangalore decided to take away our machine, if you will. So they came into the mall and they took away our machine. And in addition to doing so, they also, I will, you know, emphasize wrongfully, right? They wrongfully took away Satvik and Harish, my two co-founders. And it was very, very scary, to say the least, right? I mean, that is, I think, every entrepreneur's, you know, biggest fear. If you want to talk about like the dark side of Bitcoin, that was it. And, you know, in my case, I'm in Canada, I was in Canada, so it's a little bit different, but Satvik and Harish for, I think, a day or something were taken away. They were let go a day after because, like I said, there was no way we could have even been doing anything wrong. And it should be noted, right, in conjunction with this, that I think 2 months ago in the high court, this whole thing that I'm referring to was squashed, as in like it doesn't exist anymore. But, you know, for like a few years, it was still kind of like a cloud that hung over their shoulders. And so, yeah, what had happened is, they did this, and I think maybe the most noteworthy thing would be for me to share with you, Robert, would be that, at the time it was obviously very scary, but like 8 months later or 9 months later on a call with Satvik, I asked him, Satvik, we don't really talk about it, but like, what was that like? Like, that must have been scary, and you know what he says to me? He says, Seti, actually the food was really good. He said the bed was comfortable and the people were really nice. And I said,
Wow.
I said, are you serious? He's like, yeah. He's like, it's actually not that bad, but he's like, obviously nobody wants to be in there, but and I also asked him, like, and around this time, right, while we're fighting in the Supreme Court with the central bank, we started getting word that there was this bill that was percolating, kind of in the background. And we did a bit of I think it's called how it's, the Right to Information Act, or in the United States, you can like ask
a public
for
disclosure kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, if the government is making certain decisions, you can, as the public, you can ask to get more information, right, and they have to kind of, abide. So we had done things like that and learned that, effectively the industry was they were trying to stamp out, they're trying to choke out the industry, right? Like that was one of their main, kind of goals. And if you think about it from our, as a Goliath, of that magnitude, right? Like these are the entities that literally print the money, like the money, the oxygen that we survive on against a scrappy startup that's, just trying to figure out how to grow and serve its customers. It was a very, very intense time. But then so I asked Sat, because I said, this bill, like this thing that's coming through the pipelines, like, what if something like this goes through, like, what if they actually try and ban, forget the central bank, what if the government, which is, kind of going to get more to the recent story part, right? Which is the government is, entertaining this idea of banning it. I asked him, like, what would happen? And he's like, Sonny, you know what? It's India. We'll figure out how to get a computer. He's like, but getting that many Bitcoiners in one place together, we'll come up with so many Bitcoin business ideas, you won't even believe it. So I do think that there's this, I don't know, the spirit of like hope and entrepreneurialism in not just, I know we always hear about like the Coinbases and, all the other companies, but I think there's a lot going on, in India where people are stepping up to the plate and taking on these big challenges. And so anyway, so back to kind of the, the main storyline.
If I could ask
please.
Question
yeah, there's so much in there.
Satvik and the other co-founder were arrested.
Harish.
Basically.
Yes,
Harish.
Yes.
They were so handcuffed, put into a van
from their homes, in front of their kids.
Their homes,
and family.
So, and this is because they deployed the kiosk that was contradictory to the central bank notice. Is that kind of the reason?
They were out a day later because there was no real reason. Right. It was just mass confusion and hysteria, and people didn't know. And there was this question around, like even you said, right? Is Bitcoin banned in India or not? Right. See, this whole court case, not the one this year, not the kind of the stuff that's happening this year, but I mean, like up until last year, it wasn't about banning Bitcoin. It was about what I'm telling you, this whole central bank drama, right?
So then, okay, so wrongfully arrested more or less because they didn't actually break any law, clearly. Then my question here is, how much it's Satvik's father, right, that's involved with the law firm?
No, that's actually Surreal.
Surreal
Desai is the law firm. Yeah,
did those relationships play into their release?
Absolutely. They are. I mean, Nishit Desai and Associates, they're like literally a part of. I mean, they're practically a part of our company in the sense that they are shareholders. They're also they're a critical part of the organization, and all the way. And by the way, just to to fast forward a little bit, but this last year there was this big court case that I mentioned, right, between the IAMAI, which was the industry body, right, that came together to take on the central bank. So there was other companies and entities that came together. but there were like 5 major kind of legal points. Okay. And we can go through those one by one, or I can just give you the link and, people can look it up or whatever. Right. But there were like 5 very legal points, right? In terms of like the proportionality of the punishment, in terms of what the risks were, it not benchmarking against international standards and looking at things like FATF and, how the rest of the world was looking at it. So there were like that. Our lawyers had essentially gone through and, poked holes in all those arguments in a very like amazing way. Right? And that was, by the way, again, lawyers from, Nishit Desai and Associates and other firms like that. So they've been along the way the whole way. Yeah.
The general just question there I had is, I know you said that the justice system more or less worked because they were released when they were wrongfully arrested. But I wonder how much of that, like, would it have been very delayed had you guys not had this deep legal relationship with a very prominent law firm in India? I'm just wondering how much of that was the justice system operating well versus, knowing the right people to pull the right strings.
I think having very great, amazing lawyers are a big part of the equation.
Yeah.
And not necessarily, doing things like in a bad way, but like doing things in the right way, like literally understanding both the legal framework, but also the technology at hand and understanding where those two brush up against one another. The kind of the false arrests or whatever, that's really like a little bit of a side shoot of a story. The bigger story was the one, like I said, a year ago, when what the part I wanted to share with you was, so now imagine, 2 years in court, we're battling this thing, by then, by the way, myself, I'll be honest with you, I didn't even think we would make it through it, right? Like who gets through this is like American Gladiators times a million type of deal, right? Like, like, no way. And so I, in the midst of all this, actually, worked for Kraken for a little bit. But anyway, so what the part I wanted to share is that at the kind of the apex of the court case, the 3 judges said, okay, you guys are fighting this on the basis that this notice is unconstitutional, right? But the Constitution applies to people, not necessarily companies or groups of companies. So tell us an example now of where a person was impacted negatively. And it was Harish, so my other co-founder, who was literally on the stand along with, and it was JD, who was a lawyer from, Nishit Desai and Associates, that essentially were, right there, like at ground zero. And it was, the having to lay off the 100 people and like the false arrests and all the other million things that's, has had a ripple effect right on our lives. Like imagine, like it's crazy, right? Like to have to go through all this. So it was actually his life that was kind of put on trial. And that was, in my view, at least, I could, I'm sure people would argue with me to some extent, but all of it's available, right? Like in the PDF document, people can read it. It's all public information. And so I refer to those people as, the unsung heroes, right? The Harishes, the Satviks, the Nishit Desais, the JDeeps lawyer that actually, these are the people that, Crypto Kanun. There's a guy who is a Twitter handle is Crypto Kanun. He was literally in the courtroom tweeting in real time, word for word, what was happening. I mean, and I interviewed him on my YouTube channel as well. And he shares it. And it's just like this beautiful story of like all these people coming together that didn't even know one another, but they just, cared about this thing called freedom.
Yeah. Wow. I think amazing. That's an interesting anecdote too, for just how much technology is actually reshaping the process of legal proceeding. Right. Because that information that used to be sequestered to a courtroom, now a guy is releasing to the world via Twitter in real time. And I just often wonder how much that influences, public perception related to these things, where in the past, say in the 20th century, where media could be much more centrally controlled, that allowed the powers that be to control the narrative more effectively. Whereas in the modern age, they've sort of lost their grip on it. So,
yeah, and I was going to say is just like how Twitter can be used to do that, so can the Bitcoin blockchain. And I can't share like the names and details, but there is another little bit of an offshoot of a story where, long story short, there was a government official that was doing nefarious activities essentially, and was using Bitcoin to do it. And, companies like ours can use the blockchain to prove that as well.
Right.
So just like how people think, oh, well, some of these tools are bad for people. I agree they are, but that bit of transparency actually can be used in both ways, right? And to keep the world honest. So I don't know. Bitcoin is, I don't know what to think about it, man. It's just like, it's the most beautiful thing ever. Yeah, it's like the ultimate mind fuck.
Yeah, it is the
can't
ultimate.
Stop thinking about it.
It is the ultimate mind fuck. There's no question about that. And as Lop says, no one has found the bottom of the Bitcoin rabbit hole.
And his website's great. You've seen all the resources there.
yeah, very comprehensive. So
that's, I mean, like I said, I glossed over a lot of stuff, Robert, but I mean, that's kind of the arc, like I said, this year, lots of stuff has happened as well. But that story I just shared with you is really, to me, a special one. And I don't think many people know about it, aside from a few shares here and there. So thanks for giving me the chance to, share it with yourself and your audience.
Absolutely. So where did things stand today, I guess, in terms of the Bitcoin? So the Bitcoin mission in India, or the Bitcoin mission for your firm, and how is the conflict with the central bank? Where does that stand today? Because we're hearing these rumors again. Oh, India's banning crypto, and it just feels like deja vu.
Take everything, obviously, I say with a grain of salt, because like I said, even though I have my OCI, which is like an overseas citizenship of India, I'm a Canadian, right? So, and I'm like one of 1.5 billion people there. So I'm like a nobody, right? But my 2 cents on it. Okay, so following this, so we got banking back right away. If I had to put like some numerics on it, we were buried, obviously, as a company. It was in a very tough place. Following all of this, after 2 years of running on fumes, we, not only got banking back, we had, obviously millions of customers that started using our platform. And so the company started doing really well, really quickly. And thanks to guys like Tim Draper, who, his son, Adam, invested in us many, many years ago. We were also part of, the Boost tribe. And so again, when we were kind of like down and out and the story wasn't really out there, like guys like Tim were like, oh shit, like, okay, let's go. And we've got other people that I don't think we've even made announcements of, but like the family behind, Franklin Templeton is an investor in Uno Coin. Like I said, Max Kaiser, we've got Simon Dixon, and we just got this amazing like array of, investors that are believers in the Bitcoin mission, right? That really helped us kind of get things back in order. So we were maybe on Alexa, maybe the 100,000 top website in the world. Today we're maybe 40,000 something. So in the last 4 months, 6 months, we've come back to life. We're growing. Like I said, the company's doing well. Now, a couple months ago, maybe a month or two ago, that bill that I alluded to a while ago in my conversation with Satvik, where, the government's trying to potentially ban it, et cetera, that surfaced itself, found its way into the parliament, but not through the parliament. And so this was very different. So this wasn't judicial, this was legislative, right? And there's a difference in the sense that everything that happened to us up until this point with the court case, et cetera, was a part of the court system, right? Like I talked about judges and lawyers. What has happened more recently is a function of what's happening within the parliament. And again, I'm TLDRing a lot here, so I hope, people correct me if I'm messing it up. But essentially what happened is the government now, so like all the different arms of the government have come together, formed a committee, and they essentially were trying to propose a bill that was, how do I say it in short, super scary, right? Just like not allowed to do anything with Bitcoin. I mean, not even allowed to think about it, probably type of deal, right? Very, very scary. And so, there was, I guess you could say, not a bit of a backlash only, but also simultaneously, like I talk about the juxtaposition of all this, right? Simultaneously, you're seeing Tesla and, thanks to guys like you and MicroStrategy and all that like narrative. I mean, and so you guys might think, oh, you're just maybe doing it for certain, but no, it's like everything you guys do here is like a win for us over there. And you know what I mean, right? Like this is actually... So all this is going on literally in parallel, where now even companies in India are saying, hey, well, we might want to hold this, what is it, this engineered treasury asset, as Michael Saylor so beautifully put it, right? And now you've got them standing up. And so very quickly, and again, it's just my viewpoint, and I can't talk about, a lot of the stuff, some of the stuff that obviously happens behind the covers, but above, you saw, on Twitter, you saw the chief finance minister, I believe it was, the lady who spoke about how they, they're not going to ban Bitcoin, but, they're not going to obviously allow it like willy-nilly. They're going to find some sort of, a middle ground, which is a bit cryptic if you ask me, but still, you also saw, you just started seeing more and more regulators as well coming online saying, we're going to take a more tailored approach. So I personally believe that the narrative around banning Bitcoin in India right now is somewhat over. You might now say, hey, wait, Sunny, but what about this article? What about that article? And yes, there are articles like that come out, and sometimes they'll be like, they won't even have a person. It'll just be some unnamed person said this or whatever, right? Right. So I always think those, like, it's important to question those, because like the one thing I've learned is what you read in the news is like, 99% usually, not accurate, or something is off about it, and they never tell the full. There's just always an angle, and so I wouldn't read too much into that, but we do think there's a bit of a tide turning. However, I'll say this is that the future is a function of our efforts. Meaning, if people, like, let's say the industry members think, okay, well, it's done. Yeah. Well, Sunny said that, it's going to be all fine. And then they don't do anything, then no. But I think if you look at what's happening around the world, whether it's like industry bodies coming together and self-regulating, and you know what I mean? Like companies working together to some extent to at least alleviate some of these like regulatory concerns and building tech, right? Like what if you could build tech? Like, when in 2014, when the RBI said, oh, volatility is a concern, the first thing we launched was something like a dollar cost averaging tool, right? Where people could average their way into Bitcoin instead of have to be, exposed to the volatility. And I think, so what my point is like, if you get the industry engaged, oftentimes you can build technology to address the concerns of regulators instead of having regulators come in and try and, regulate something that they maybe don't fully understand or appreciate. So that's kind of, I think, where India is today. I think it's turned a corner, but now it's more a question of who gets to play. Will it be these like, players that have been in the space for 8 years that maybe aren't like banks and, the stock exchanges and the big guys? Or is it going to be them? And so I'm not saying it's by any means, behind us, but the challenge ahead, I think, is more along those lines, if that makes sense. Yeah.
So the 2-year struggle in court, and then the final favorable decision for you guys, I guess, were they litigating Uno Coin, or was it the individual?
It was actually the IAMAI, the India's Association of Internet and Mobile Association of India. So it was it's like Google, and all the big entities are a part of this like massive kind of industry body. It's not just like a Bitcoin thing, but they were essentially the face of the court case, right? But if you peel the onion back a bit, you'll see that the lawyer, one of the main lawyers, was a guy named Jaydeep, who works for Nishit Desai and Associates, and another lawyer as well who was working closely with Jaydeep. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that there's a lot of, I don't know if that answers your question, but there's a lot of maybe I missed that.
So the question is the final decision, which was I'll let you explain, and then how has that impacted India's regulatory stance on Bitcoin going forward? Like, was that a pivotal decision?
We think it's fairly big because of the fact that this was, in the court of law. Like, these are judges in the Supreme Court that decided that, that Bitcoin, or at least the bank ban on Bitcoin companies was unconstitutional. And that was essentially the final kind of verdict, right? That they just removed that ban. And as soon as that happened, like I said, all of our payment processing and banking kind of came online. But so that's kind of, so that's what that means. Now, what's happening now, and some of the, I guess, more recently, like I said, is a bit different because, people who are elected officials are different from people like, for example, who run the central bank or judges and lawyers, right? And that's another thing I'm starting to realize, or I've learned over the last 8 years, Robert, is that the government is really kind of like a multi-headed Loch Ness monster, right?
Yeah,
like and where one doesn't even talk to the other. And
yes.
to say that, oh, this is the Indian government's position is very, very challenging to say, right? Because what about FEMA? What about SEBI? What about, RBI? What about, so there's literally, so you have to almost try and, at least as an entrepreneur, which is really difficult, is try and understand, ideally by hiring lawyers as well, but like you have to understand what those laws are and try and, not break them, right? Because as an entrepreneur, because if you're trying to introduce something like Bitcoin, if you think of it as like a science experiment, just introducing Bitcoin to the market is the variable that's your variable, if you will, and all the other variables you're trying to keep it constant.
Yeah, right.
So we try not to mess with every element. Like we try and do everything by the book because we know every eyeball is going to be on us.
Yeah,
and that's kind of been good and bad, but it's been interesting nonetheless. I'd much rather be sitting here telling a story like Brian about Coinbase going public, but it is what it is, I guess.
But it's back to the core value proposition of Bitcoin being uncontrollable, right? No one can wrangle it in and fit it into some jurisdictional framework that it will abide by. That not only is that its greatest value proposition, but that's also its greatest challenge in bringing it to market, is that you have all these rulemaking bodies attempting to control it in some way, or at least protected their interests with Bitcoin coming into the market. And to your point, this multi-headed beast that is the government and regulatory framework or frameworks around the world, they're all trying to look out for their own interests in relationship to Bitcoin. So I can see where things get super murky and complicated very quickly, which is why the entrepreneur can never be complacent, right? You got to constantly be vigilant.
But it's kind of ironic, though, that in search of freedom, we need to learn all about this stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you'd think that Bitcoin was a bit of an escape valve, but like the more you try and serve in this space, like it's like chewing glass and staring into the abyss. Like I think Elon said that or something. It's just so accurate. And the number of times where I think we've felt that is far too numerous. But you have to have something that, like I said, is Bitcoin is just so beautiful that it's hard not to be in service of it.
So that's where you guys are at today. You've gotten more regulatory clarity, and now you're trying to bring Bitcoin to billions.
Bring Bitcoin to billions. We're at, like I said, 2 million. We've got a lot of exciting things ahead. We're growing. We're trying to work with all the other industry players as well as we can to collaborate on these types of fronts. I do, if other exchange owners or whatever, if they're listening to this, we do have a lot of kind of conversations going on now to try and really be proactive about addressing these risks, right? Like ultimately governments are concerned about certain risks. And so we think it's important that people like us that are engineers, that are entrepreneurs, that are facing these challenges day in and day out, actually address these risks like big boys, right? Like that actually come up with like solutions to this and say, hey, look, we got it. Like this whatever, this thing you're worried about here, this is how we solve it. Right. And so I think that's where we're at. Like I said, we're growing now again. The company's doing quite well, never as well as you obviously wanted to do, but it feels good. Coinbase, I think, set a new standard in terms of what's possible. And you just see all the companies around the world doing so well, and Bitcoin's just doing well. And so, we're really happy, man. We're just, right now is definitely a good time, but brace for impact. Never get too complacent, never get too excited.
Well, honestly, it's a really great story, and I'm glad that it's got at least a happy ending for now. I mean, you guys have done a lot of good work, come a long ways. So maybe we can pivot a little bit now into some more, general life or philosophy topics. I've seen you use this term, lean just beyond your edge. Could you tell me what that means?
Yeah. I think it means just that. I think, because I was listening to a lot of your talks, right, with Lex and all these guys, and I loved how you got philosophical. So I didn't want to just leave this as storytelling. I wanted to kind of dig deep a bit. And I feel like that is one of those things. It was funny. Someone asked GPT-3 the other day. It was on Twitter. They asked him, how do you do something creative? And this AI bot said, do that which you fear most.
Mm.
And I think there's so much truth in that, like in the last 4 months, 5 months, Robert, I've put out almost 100 like 2-hour long YouTube videos.
Wow.
Mainly because I'm putting it all out there. I'm putting it all out there as in like, whether it's like business wise, whether it's building communities, whether it's, educating people, whether it's like whatever, making documentaries. Like I even like, it's a bit embarrassing to admit, but I'm even like creating music now. I'm just learning, but I'm just making music about Bitcoin.
So cool.
It's like,
Yeah.
because you don't know how long we're gonna. I mean, I hope I live forever. Like I love the singularity shit, but as I get older, I kind of think like there's a good chance I might not. I mean, humans haven't figured it out just yet. So if that's the case, then leave nothing to chance. Just put it all out there. Is kind of, I don't know, my thinking. And I think I heard you have a daughter as well. It's like when you got kids at home, you're just like, like. I don't want them to be older and be like, well, why didn't you just try a little bit harder about this Bitcoin thing? We could have had freedom and we didn't have to be living in cages and, and whatever. But I think it's important to, speak up, because I do think that at one point it gets too dangerous to do so. And I don't think that point's arrived yet. So I'm just trying to, encourage more people to just be like, just turn on your camera at home and do a YouTube thing if you're stuck at home, or do something, but like, speak up, because your future depends on it.
That's a great way to look at it. And it seems to be the only path for growth is to kind of get comfortable getting uncomfortable, sort of thing, getting outside of your own comfort zone consistently. Reminds me of this quote, I think from Schwarzenegger. He said, you must first know what is too much before you know what is enough. So it's like, you really have to, it's the entrepreneurial spirit, right? We're on the edge of our own understanding, experimenting, iterating, trying to turn something from the unknown into something useful and known. And that requires, a lot of fail forward, right? Which I like that. Lean just beyond your edge. So it's always, I guess the spirit would be to always have one foot in order and one foot kind of striding towards chaos a little bit to see what you can figure out and
definitely
help people with.
One of my other favorite quotes is by this gentleman named Vinod Khosla, which is that this is probably my favorite quote, which is, success matters, failure is inconsequential. So failure matters. Success matters, failure is inconsequential. I think that is one of the most beautiful quotes, and it just, I don't know, for me, it gives me this framework where it's like, failure doesn't matter, like even a tiny bit. Because when I'm 80 years old, people will just look back and just talk about the things that actually worked. All the million things you tried, and the stupid little songs and videos and companies and little brain farts here and there. No one's going to remember. No one gives a shit. That's a great way.
I love this low time preference lens you're putting on it, where you're talking about your future self, right? Your 80-year-old self or whatever. Looking back on your life. And it's true that people, if you do something and it's abysmal and the market doesn't find it useful, they'll just forget about it. But it's through that process of trying and experimenting that you're going to do these few things that really shine and stand out in your life. So it reminds me, I guess the similar one I've used in my own mind is, there is no losing. There's only winning or learning, right? You're either successful or you're failing, and you're hopefully learning from that failure to incorporate, into your patterns of action for future success. So great way to look at it.
And I think, little things like family, and I know they sound a bit cliche, but like having a peaceful home where you're not like fighting, having a wife that's like super supportive, like literally unconditionally supportive, having kids that get it, having parents that get it, that, you know what I mean? Like, I think there's a lot of things that make it like, I think health and mindset and, morning routines and meditation and yoga and blah, blah, blah. There's all these other little nuances that people would never talk about, in a Bitcoin show or whatever, that without it, like without, getting like your posture straight and your breathing exercise, without doing all these things, you cannot even think about trying to take on, the Goliaths of the world. Right. I personally believe, because if you're broken, then you're fucked. The world will eat you up and spit you out. You know what I mean?
This is like Jordan Peterson telling people, if they want to save the world, go clean their room, right? You got to start small. There's that Naval quote too. It's funny how lost I get in quotes when we start talking philosophy, but there's just so many good ones. Naval saying that the three things money can't buy, or I think a sound mind, a fit body, and a house full of love, or household full of love. And you really, really have to work at that. And it's not easy to stick the landing on all three. Takes a lot of work and maintenance. And I know it's something I'm personally striving towards all the time. Definitely don't have it perfected, but working.
And I think a lot of people also, Robert, they use their family as an excuse, and myself included, right? But I think that's kind of the worst of it all. Is I think a lot of people, they turn 80 and the should've, could've, would've type of deal ends up being, you didn't. It was because of you, and it's like, no, like leave it all out there, and I think your wife and your kids will respect you more. There's this. Have you ever heard of a guy named David Data? I was going to ask you.
No.
No. Anyway, so he's got this like beautiful story in one of his books where he talks about this like guy who's about to go to war, and he turns to his wife as he's leaving his house, and his wife's like, don't go, like starts crying, right? And then he lays out like two different kind of paths. One is where he's like, yeah, you're right. Like, I won't go. I'll just stay home. And then there's the second one where, he goes, and it's ironic, but like in the first one, you'd think that your wife would be more happy. It's like, well, he listened to me. Right. But in reality, it's like, there was something that he had to do. And so I don't know. I always think about, mission before anything else. Right. And I think like Bitcoin is really like, we're living during this exciting time where, only a handful of people even get this thing. And we see kind of the asymmetry in like the world we live in, and how this could be this like ultimate source of truth for like, bringing love and freedom into this world, that it's just like our duty, right? Like you don't want to be, like I said, turning old when your energy starts to drop and your biceps aren't as big, you can't run as fast, you can't do the spinning back kick as nicely. I mean, I don't want to be that way and worried, right? I want to be acting now, strong, healthy, and put everything out there, man.
Which plays into the first one, like to go off to war is to lean into your edge, right? To go sacrifice for the mission. And that's how I think you create a more satisfactory life for yourself, because if you chose not to go, you'd probably always regret it. But then also, to your point, for your family, right? We're aiming creatures. We need a mission. We need a thing to go do, and to see something as important as many of us find Bitcoin, and then to choose to be complacent or stay home, I think is just a pathway to a very unfulfilled existence, you might say. But that's interesting. You have to actually contradict the woman, which is you must be selective when you do that.
But I think a true woman, like they get it, they get that, I mean, at least, I don't know, that, you know what I mean? Like sometimes your man's just gotta, be in the basement and doing his YouTube videos or staying up late night and making those business calls or whatever it is. Right. But I think it's very difficult to find someone that can be supportive and understand, that. And so I think I've been very lucky on that front. Parents, right? Like to know that I don't need to support my parents financially. Like my parents had to support theirs. Like, can you imagine? That must have been hard. Like having to send money back every month, let alone knowing that if anything goes wrong or anything I've ever had gone wrong in the past, I could always just like pull the parachute and be like, Mom, Dad, I'm coming home. I have never had to, but the fact that I have that at my beck and call gives me so much strength and gives me so much ability to take risk that, again, it's all these little, like, I think nuances that, people kind of like take credit for. It's like, oh, it's like, nah, it's like, it's usually a function of like a lot of people helping out and, Yeah. And then money's just the least of it. Like think of reputation, like up until even 6 months, 3 months ago, dude, like reputationally to be a Bitcoiner is like, it's like death. Like most people will think you are a professional scammer of sorts. Like that is literally the narrative that most media and governments and around the world people paint of this space. And Bitcoin doesn't have a media budget, right? Like no one's going to pay to. So it's really frustrating, but this is why I'm doing kind of like my Bitcoin stories thing every day. I'm just trying to interview authors and different people, and just like put a spotlight and encourage other people. Be like, look, you can do it too. Like whatever your art is, just bring it and just offer it for Bitcoin. Like you don't need to do anything different.
It's a call to arms for educators because Bitcoin doesn't have anyone paid to defend it necessarily. It really is just this pure implementation of timeless monetary principles. And in a lot of ways, maybe like an implementation of natural law, right? It gives you your right, an inviolable right to life, liberty, and property when you're holding Bitcoin. It's like, this is monetary energy. It supports your life. It gives you absolute sovereignty over your money, which gives you, essentially as much liberty as you can have in the world with money. And then it's a property right that can't be violated, through inflation or confiscation, which is really important, as we've seen throughout history. So I wonder if, is that what you've talked about, this matching our consciousness to the world's energy? What is the relationship that you see between Bitcoin and consciousness? Is it changing the way we see the world, or are we changing? Like, what's going on? Because it seems to be changing people a lot.
What would I say? Where the road to religion ends, the road to spirituality begins. Where the road to spirituality ends, the road to reality begins. So to me, Bitcoin is this like ultimate truth source. It's this reality that I just feel like I can build my life around. So I kind of see it as I don't know. It's just like just talking about it, like I'm 10 years into this game, right? It's got nothing to do with all-time highs, none of that. It's just like when I just think of it, I just think of the word freedom, right? That's literally the word that resonates most. And I think, the deep masculine energy in me, right? And I'm not talking about men versus women. I'm talking about that masculine energy that I think girls or guys or anyone can have. It really calls for freedom, at our deep source. When we talk about, like kind of our darkest desires, or we talk about, our consciousness matching the world's energy, to me, that means essentially it's not enough to just have these ideals. Like, Max Kaiser, we talked about how Bitcoin and Satoshi is essentially God, in some ways, how Bitcoin is just like this new religion, right? That would solve a lot of our tax problems, by the way. But I'm just saying is that I do think that in my mind, and again, as somebody who, my wife is Christian, my parents are Hindu, I'm just flat out confused. I go to church when church was a thing before the whole, coronavirus thing, right? Before I'd go every weekend, right? Not because I'm Christian, but just because I like going with my wife. She's hot. And I like keeping her company and I learn things here and there, right? But I kind of have this relationship with religion where it's like, I'll learn what I can. But I do think that Bitcoin, it represents that, right? But the problem is that the world's not there yet. The world's not even close to there yet. And they're not there for reasons that you can't even blame them for, right? It's like, first of all, this Bitcoin thing is super complicated, right? I mean, the math and the crypto and everything is. So ultimately, those who don't understand tech, they have to believe or trust others.
Right.
So what I've seen my role in this ecosystem has been to try and be that bridge, right? Like why on earth would I try and build a business where, you try and interface with banks and regulators and this and that? We could easily just be building a Bitcoin only business, right? But we chose this path, or I chose this path because we knew it was going to be hard, but we also knew somebody needed to do it, right? If nobody was going to connect the traditional financial world with this new world, as hard as it's going to be, as you know, whether it's like the false arrests, whether it's the laying off 100 people, whether it's, oh my God, like I've only shared like a tiny bit. Like I've literally had co-founders in Canada that have passed away because of working too hard, you know, like it is brutal, dude. Like it's literally like the hardest thing ever, but I also couldn't imagine doing anything else. You know what I mean? Like I even tried. I tried for a little bit when shit hit the fan in India with the whole regulatory stuff. I tried to, you know, move away from Bitcoin a bit, but then you get guys like Jesse, right? Like the Jesus of Bitcoin, if you ask me, right? Like guys like him, literally being like, Sonny, come on board with us. You know, like keep everything you got in India. If you win, go back. Yeah. If you don't, stick it out with us.
Right.
What job do you want? What's your ideal role? You don't have to look at your watch. It's like, say what? Like, are you serious? Like, this is what this community is made of. So I don't know, man. I've just been touched by so many like different people and stories and yeah, and now I'm just on a bit of a mission to just try and tell these stories, you know, like of all these people that I consider to be heroes.
That's awesome. Yeah. So then if Bitcoin is this, which I think we agree, it's this single and arguable global consensus, right? It's just, it's truth. You can't really argue with what's on the Bitcoin blockchain once it's deep enough. Then that implies that the money we're living in, right? The monetary oxygen we're breathing is all false. It's a lie, right? There's no consensus at all. We have no idea how many dollars are in circulation, how many will be in circulation, who's profiting. Do you think that impacts our consciousness? I mean, does that influence our character and behavior?
Of course. I think it goes back to kind of like that time and energy conversation, right? Like if you always feel like there's more time than money type of deal, where at the end of the month, you're always stressed about that. You can't help but be put into this like reactionary, almost like reflexive state where you're just like an animal, right? Just trying to survive. Because you literally can't dig yourself out of this hole because it's like everything is stacked up against you. And so yeah, I really do believe that Bitcoin is this like escape valve, this like measuring stick, this source of truth that allows you to, you know, if I mean, you know, the crazy thing, Robert, is we're talking about like Bitcoin and you should be, you know, dollar cost averaging or saving. The crazy thing I found was like 9 out of 10 families didn't even save. Like literally their cash flow, they don't even know what cash flow or net worth is, right? Like little things like that. Well, how would they know? Who ever taught them, right?
Yeah.
So they don't even know at the end of the month, like how to balance their, It's scary. So forget hodling and that. Like, I feel like there's a lot of education that needs to happen around money. Yeah. And so the fact that your kind of main, you know, text is what is money?
Yeah. The quote that really resonated with me recently, I discovered it, right? Because that is the thrust of the What is Money show, is to get people to ask themselves that question such that they start to reevaluate their worldview. You know, I think it is the fundamental question is once you understand the nature of money, you start to understand the nature of socioeconomic reality. But I heard this quote from, I think, H.G. Wells. He said, civilization is a race between education and catastrophe. So it feels like that's the race we're running. It's like trying to arm people with knowledge.
Say that again. I want to.
Civilization is a race between education and catastrophe. So, you know, civilization itself is the embodied treasury of knowledge, right? We're learning through experimentation and we're accumulating capital. The capital insulates us from risk, you know, the risk of whatever, starvation, climate, each other, whatever it may be. And that's what increases the standard of living in the world. But I don't know, people don't, that's very simple in a way. It's like, okay, we need to create more stuff and be smarter, basically, to survive in nature at scale. But no one talks about that. No one's, you know, we have education, but education, it's very myopic in a lot of ways, especially as it pertains to money and economics. And these, you know, people don't understand cash flow or net worth. Like, come on, that's the first thing you need to understand to run a household, right? I have a master's degree in accounting, by the way, so I can speak to this experience in the US. Like, they don't teach you anything about managing your personal finances. Not one thing. let alone teach you anything about Austrian economics or central banking or the nature of money. Like they don't even touch that. They don't even teach you personal finances, how to do your personal taxes, nothing. I have a master's degree in tax. I learned how to do other people's taxes and companies' taxes and whatnot, but no one ever gave you advice like how to manage your own tax and financial affairs. That's kind of a glaring deficiency in the educational system, I would say.
And so Bitcoin is many orders of magnitude away still from, you could say like the human consciousness, right?
Yeah.
For them to really wrap their head around it, because there's layers of, whether it's done intentionally or unintentionally, I don't know, but it is systemic and it is widespread. It is global. It is, it's a terrible, terrible thing. And like I said, I've seen it. And, when you sit across from like a husband and a wife and their kids are playing in the back and you're going through their numbers and they're just like dying in debt. And this is like years ago, forget the pandemic and things like that, right?
Yeah.
I can only imagine like how people are dealing with it now.
Yeah.
And so there needs to be that fundamental education. And then once you educate people about what is money, which I think you do better than anyone in the world, then you start to open the, kind of the door towards, well, how does, Bitcoin fit in? And really, Robert, I think the fact that Bitcoin gets us to ask the question, like I interview a lot of people, right? Not just like the Max Kaisers and the Adam Drapers, but like young people that are starting companies, this, that, try to get different views. And you'd be surprised how many young people first understand Bitcoin and then understand money. Then they evaluate the fiat system based through the lens of Bitcoin.
Yes.
It is beautiful. It is beautiful. And so I don't know. I really think that, I don't know, maybe people like me worry too much that, there's all these challenges and I think it'll just become so glaringly obvious, with the youth again, picking this stuff up that, what do you don't have to argue with me. You're going to have to argue with your son when you get home or your daughter, it's like, good luck with that.
Yeah. Sonny, do you have a life philosophy?
The first thing that comes to mind is a quote again, David Data. He's my favorite, by the way, is stop waiting, feel everything, love achingly, give impeccably, let go. So if I had to pick one, stop waiting, feel everything, love achingly, give impeccably, and let go. I would say those are my 5 of like kind of simple yet like philosophical kind of guiding, signposts, if you will, that just I try to remind myself of.
That's beautiful. What the one that really resonates with me there is the let go. I see that's kind of I did yoga for like 12 years pretty seriously. And that's kind of the core teaching in a lot of ways, is like to learn to let go of things. Life is constantly changing and transient and things come and go. And it's just, I guess non-attachment is kind of another way to say it, perhaps. How do you, those are beautiful words, beautiful philosophy. How do you implement that into your life?
Again, this is just the first thing that comes to my mind is I would say by it sounds corny, but by practicing presence, I would say that would be my ultimate goal. So to be in the moment. So to look at the colors, to keep my breath full, to keep my posture upright, to feel literally the moment and to give myself to this moment, all of myself, not where I'm thinking 10% of my brain on what I'm going to eat, the steak, and then the 20%, I had an argument I got with, my buddy. So how do I give myself completely to this moment? And I find like all the other things kind of just spiral out of that, whether it's like business, and it's not like, you don't do planning or business plans and stuff. Sure. We do all that, but it's kind of doing that by being infinitely present is, I think, my secret weapon, if you will. That's kind of the one thing that once I learned, I was like, oh wait, I don't need to read any books. I don't need to meditate or yoga, or I can do that stuff, but I don't need to do any of that. It's like, just be present and everything just kind of unlocks itself from there. So I would say that's probably the biggest thing.
That's great. Yeah. It's beautiful in its simplicity, difficult to do, actually. Something I would say kind of like a moving meditation in a way, where you're not getting overly attached to your thoughts, and your mind can go anywhere and elsewhere. It's like this floating point consciousness, but to just kind of stay here and now, it's really difficult to do. But meditation has helped me with that as well. And I like that. I like that.
And the let go thing too, right? I think it takes practice, but it's like, when like there's a feather falling, you try and grab it. The harder you try, the more it gets away from you. When you just put your hand out and it just kind of comes to you. So I feel like that's the final piece of the manifestation piece is, you have to have an intention and write it down and do this and do that and plan it out and get a team. But ultimately, if it doesn't happen, it's all good in the hood.
Yeah.
I think that's the icing on the cake, right? You just gotta let go. But it's more than just, a yogic practice or like a meditation session. It's about, kind of even knowing that if things don't work out with my wife, it'll be okay.
Yeah,
type of deal.
It's almost stoic in a way, right? Just equanimity in the face of all things.
And that makes it even better, and then you're like, oh, I choose this instead of, I don't know. It's like, So I don't know. I feel so lucky, man, to be like, I'm telling this story a bit like robotic because I've been saying it, but I've had to kind of reflect through it. It's like, wow, I've spent the last 10 years doing what I love. Yes, it's been super painful, and I'm sure I could have figured out, other ways to have made way more money, but the story is just so compelling, and we've done okay, or we're definitely not struggling. That's for sure.
Yeah, that reminds me, the letting go too of this quote that nature never rushes, yet it accomplishes all things. There's just this, we can apply good effort and good attitude towards the attainment of an outcome, but we also have to really give a lot of room for natural processes to unfold, right? We have to learn at our own pace. We have to grow at our own pace. The business has to evolve along this organic path to some extent, and you just can't force outcomes. So I think that's a lesson I've learned much more deeply as I've aged. I think when I was younger, I just was much more impatient, like trying to get from A to B really quick. But you have to really have, I guess, kind of a reverence for the journey in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And it's also kind of funny that the scientific process applied to a business enables you to be less attached to outcomes. So if you treat it literally like a grade 7 science project where you're just like trying different things and, and you let the market tell you if it works or not, it's kind of hard to get down on yourself. You know what I mean? You're just like, well, I'm doing what I love. And anyways, I think perspective is a big thing. And, obviously if you're in this Bitcoin space, like a day is like, 10 years in any other industry. So you've got to be super on top of it. And, and things happen quickly, and you can get left in the dust. If it's not regulators, it's your competitors that are like, swimming laps around you because you forgot to do something that they did, type of deal. And now the whole market loves them. It's like, oh my God. But we don't want to support, non-Bitcoin assets. Oh yeah. Well, if there's a company that does 100 shit coins with Bitcoin and you just do one, why are we going to come to you? And that was literally our major threat, you could say 3 to 4 years ago, where, fortunately or unfortunately, we kind of, again, and I wanted to bring this up because I know amongst like Bitcoiners, there's like this, obviously this, and then I can affiliate to that, like kind of distaste towards other cryptocurrencies. But, we kind of went through a bit of a space where we would have gone out of business if we didn't bring in other assets. And it's like a really, like a not cool thing to have to admit, but it's true. Like I said, and we tried to, again, to make it so that people would be kind of, we could use that, but then gear them towards Bitcoin. But ultimately people are free to choose, right? Like, and all you can do is educate. And that's why ultimately for me, I do a daily Bitcoin stories show, just to let people know, like whether you watch my show or not, just the fact that every day I'm doing something about Bitcoin. It means that, and the funny thing is all these guys in these different crypto, they're all roads lead back to Bitcoin, right? So 100%. So anyways, I'm getting off topic, but I don't know, Robert, what else you got for me, man? This has been so much fun. I really appreciate this.
Yeah, man. No, this has been a great conversation. Your spirit really comes through too. I think you're doing a great job of leaning into every moment or being present in every moment. I could definitely feel your full I guess, vibe or capacity. You're not just bringing the mind, not just bringing the heart, you're bringing the integrated whole. So I appreciate that. You've mentioned a lot about how it sounds like you try to make decisions through the lens of your future self, which I think is sort of a more common attitude that Bitcoiners tend to adopt. We adopt a lower time preference sort of naturally by having this ultimate sound store of value in a lot of ways. I think having kids also contributes to that. There's a number of things that make you think longer term. How do you see, do you have a vision for your life at, say, 80 years old? Like, you're sitting back wherever you're at, what are you surrounded by? Who are you talking to? What have you accomplished? You laid out your life philosophy. Where do you see that how do you see that manifesting, I guess, in the longer term of your life?
It's going to sound completely ridiculous, but forever, I've always kind of felt like eventually I'm going to be building future cities. That's kind of where I'm going to be doing. So that will involve either me acquiring a lot of land or doing it in conjunction with others and building freedom loving, technology loving, risk taking, entrepreneurial people where we all come together and we chill and build things,
So the citadels.
Yeah. So I think that is most likely where my future will be. And there'll be like the flare gas Bitcoin mining guys taking oil. There'll be wind turbines, there'll be solar panels. We'll have it all. Bitcoin will be being, and I spent 10 years traveling and meeting professors and seeing research labs and stuff. So I always had this vision of bringing together a lot of universities and building these like I said, futuristic cities, right? That's kind of where I think I even have a name. It's I hope I have the domain still, but InfoNet Energy. So the integration of information and energy, which if you ask me is essentially the components of the universe. That's all that exists is just energy and information, and even mass that seems to be something physical is actually just energy, right? E equals mc squared. So all of it is just just like a rearrangement of energy. And so I always had this vision of building cities around the world where people are working together to essentially further this whole thing we're talking about, right? Love and freedom and whether it's doing yoga or, building, like I said, a Bitcoin app or whatever. It's just whether it's quad rotors and I can't even fly my freaking quad rotor anymore in Canada right now without becoming a pilot, essentially. What's up with that?
What is that? The quad what?
Oh, the DJI, they're just the four propeller, the
little drones.
The drones that fly themselves, essentially. They're super cool. But my point is how can you tinker and how can you embrace but you get where I'm going. I'm very fascinated by robotics. My wife is a mechatronics engineer. I spent 8 years in robotics. I think that Bitcoin and robotics will become the next. Let's just put it this way. In 10 years, robots will use Bitcoin more than humans. 100%. I'm putting my money on it. Meaning my Tesla, as it passes yours on the highway, because yours knows my calendar and mine, it'll send you Satoshis, not a wire transfer. Right. And I think that, and I've been saying that since 7 years ago, not since Tesla got in, but I do think that's going to be inevitable, especially now more so, right? Yeah. Or maybe it'll be Doge. Hopefully not.
That'll be a wolf ride if so.
The wolf ride. So man. So that's kind of where I see myself, and hopefully surrounded by Bitcoiners. And I don't know. It's I'm not gonna lie. This last year has been really hard. The backbone of my story really is events. I've been doing Bitcoin events every 3 months, every 6 months. People in Toronto know me for this. I had 1,000 people to Sheraton a couple of years ago. We were doing them all the time in India events. And so I miss being around people. And I'm a people person, and, I kind of hated it by the end of it because, you get bored of all of it and you're just but now, I can't wait. I can't wait to be around people again.
Yeah. It's definitely been too long. I'm more of an ambivert, kind of somewhere in between introvert and extrovert. I don't really need a social setting a lot to thrive, but it's been a lot of solitude. I really like solitude normally, but it's been a lot the past year. So I hear you on
Yeah.
that. If you think, so when they lay you to rest, whoever they, I guess your family, whoever it is, like there's this thought experiment about, which is a very low time preference thing. What do you want your eulogy to sound like? Have you thought about that at all? Like, what do you want to be remembered for? What legacy do you want to leave?
Okay. So up until very, very recently, my standard answer was always, I'm living forever. Okay. Like I seriously convinced myself that the singularity is near, and that with what I know about robotics and biotechnology and nanotechnology, that it's inevitable that I will live forever. My parents, unfortunately, may not, because they don't fall into that escape velocity trajectory curve of where I think the science points. But I've met Aubrey de Grey, and I studied a lot of this stuff. So I still believe that there's a very, very high chance that I don't have to write my eulogy. However, recently, I've kind of been entertaining the thought that, Sonny, and by the way, I do think the forever thing is great, because you want to talk about long time preference, try forever. You know what I'm saying, right? Like if you're alive forever, like, your exit strategy is never, okay, I'm going to hold on to my Bitcoin forever type of deal. So it is empowering. And I do encourage people to consider it, because it's not your average lens. And I think it's empowering. But what would I want? I don't know if I've thought about that one deeply enough, man. Maybe, wow, that's a hard one. It's kind of like, it's kind of troubling to think about, because I just told you I had a friend in Toronto who's a co-founder of one of the companies here that passed away at a really young age. And so I guess, even though I don't want to think about it, I'm not going to lie, I do. But I don't know, to the extent where what they're saying about me, maybe that he was, smart enough to see a way forward for humanity, and courageous enough to act, if I had to say
it. Beautiful. Yeah. Intelligence plus courage equals good outcomes.
Includes, love and freedom. There you go. We got a formula.
Beautiful. Well, Sonny, this has been an electric conversation. I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot. I appreciate you sharing your stories from the front lines and sharing a bit about your own personal life philosophy and views. Happy to have you on again sometime. But this was really
this
great.
Has been unlike any other interview, man. This has been a lot of fun. I was looking forward to it, but it definitely, it did. Yeah. So it's been awesome, man. Anytime, for sure. I'm down to come back. We can jam again, but this has been awesome. Awesome, man. All right. Well, thank you so much. Oh, I guess, sorry, tell people where they can find you. SonnyRay.com. That's my website. And then unocoin.com, paycase.com. Those are the two other projects that, Unocoin and Paycase are my two babies. But yeah, Sonny Ray, I put everything up there. I do, like I said, oh my God, probably way too much, man. Probably way too much. I blog, I do a vlog, I do vodcasting, I do music, I build companies, I consult, I do whatever I can, whatever I have in me, I put it out there. Some of it's probably really, really terrible, like I said, but whatever, man. I don't care if people make fun of me. It's not a big deal. Well, it's aspirational. Yeah. For you to put it all out there, it's motivating to other people in the world that are trying to figure out how to, I guess, make their way as well. So thank you for all that you do. Thank you for all that you have done for Bitcoin. And thank you for being a part of the mission. Thank you. Yeah, it's great to, connect with other Bitcoin warriors. That's what I would consider you to be. I love everything you do, man. Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. But yeah, It's just been fantastic.